Hi, this is Paul Solt from iPhone Dev TV, and I want to give you an introduction to Xcode and how you can use it to either create an iPhone app or a Mac app. I'm going to show you two different versions. So let's get started. I'm going to highlight my mouse. We're going to go ahead and create a new Xcode project, and we'll first start with the Mac app. Now, the only reason I would create this Mac app is as a learning thing. If you really want to make an application that other people can use on their Mac, you can do a Cocoa application. I'm not going to show you how to do that. Instead, I'm going to show you how to do a command line tool. And this is just a quick and dirty way to get working with Objective-C code. So the only reason you would do this is if you want to run a tool that would run sort of in the background. There's a lot of things on your computer that run in the background and they don't have user interfaces. So this is one way to do that, but it's also a really good starting point anytime you want to play around with Objective-C. So if you want to try working with the NSString, or even if you want to work with another language like C++ or C, the command line tool is where you want to start. Now, if we hit next, this will allow us to give it a name. So we'll just call this command line tool. And now here's the options that you have for either creating a Objective-C application that allows you to write Objective-C code or a C++ or a C. So if I select C, this is going to allow me to do C programming. Now, that's a little bit different than if you wanted to do an iPhone app. If we do C++, you can do C++ development. So it'll set you up for that. And then if you do Foundation, I don't know why it's not just called Objective-C, but this will allow you to do the Objective-C programming. And so these are different configurations that just get you started. So it creates a template that's got some code files that you can work with and just start messing around with Objective-C. So I'm going to show you how to create an Objective-C command line tool so that we can just play around with some simple code in Objective-C. So we'll select Foundation, give it an organization name, just call it your name, and then a company identifier. This can be anything. It just needs to be unique. I tend to use the reverse of my website just so that it matches what I've registered with Apple, but you can put any value you want here. Now we'll hit next. And I always save everything on my desktop into a folder called my projects folder. I create tons of test projects, and they're mostly throwaway projects. But I do have some projects that I store with a Git repository, so you can turn that on if you want version control. I'm not going to show you how to work with that in this video, but if I get enough feedback, I might do another video on working with Git and GitHub. And here I'll just select my projects folder. So here I put my code in here, and as you can see, there are tons of projects here. So I'll hit create. And this will create a new template for me to work with. It's got its own settings so that anytime I want to test out a new idea, I just create a new Xcode project, and it's just a new workspace. It's a new area. It's a new playground where I can mess around with some code. So right off the bat, we'll see the target, and that is going to be the command line tool, and you'll see this like little weird icon. It says, I think, EXE in that top left corner. It's really small here. And then we've got the target, which is going to be our Mac, and this is a 64-bit Mac, so it's going to run on the latest Mac computers. Now, when I hit run, if I press that again, it is going to build it, and then it's going to run it, and then it's going to finish. So the thing about the command line tools is that there's no run loop, and what that means is that once the program is done, it's done. It doesn't keep on going. A normal application on your iPhone or your Mac that has a user interface is going to have a run loop. And what that means is that it's going to stay running until you hit the exit button. So it's got this loop that just keeps on going. And so if it was a game, the loop would be repeating maybe 60 or 30 times per second, and it would be updating the visuals in the game, and you can see the characters move around the screen. Since we're just working on a test app, we're not going to need that, and it just starts and it ends. And so we'll see that it ends with exit code 0, and 0 is a good exit code to end. So it's got to return 0 here. That's why it's ending with that. Sometimes you might end with another thing. Do not worry about that. The important part is we're going to play around in this area within the auto release pool. And so we can customize this message however we want. we could say iPhone apps are cool, but I learned on a Mac. And so you can write whatever you want and just hit the start button and it will run and it will print out stuff. So here it's printing out the message that I told it to print out. Now, some important things to note when you're in Xcode. We've got the project name here, and this allows us to select and see project settings. So when I click on this, we can get the project settings. Now, another thing to note is that there are tabs here. These tabs do different things, and usually when you start out, you just want this tab. Sometimes it'll jump to this tab when you have a bug, and it will jump to one of these tabs, this tab right here, when you are running the app sometimes. But when you want to get back to things, just click on this icon here. Now, in the top right, we can make this panel disappear by clicking on this icon. So that's one of the ways that you can get more space on a smaller screen. So when we have the project settings up, we can choose the different project settings. And right now, a lot of this won't mean anything to you. You generally won't have to change anything in here, especially if you're just doing a test app. So don't worry about the project settings. That's just how to get to it. There's also this little icon that will hide your overall project settings and then your target setting. A target is the actual app or the executable that it's going to create. So that's the end product. And you can have multiple targets. Usually you have one project. So that's getting started. Now, when you want to open up these things, we'll see a lot of things. So Foundation is the Objective-C framework, and that's why it's called Foundation in the settings. They could make it a little bit more user-friendly if they just called it Objective-C, but they don't. Products is the actual executable that is created and runs, and that creates this output down here. The PCH file is it's a header file that imports the Objective-C stuff. So generally you won't have to mess with this. Here we've got another file that's got a lot of strings and stuff, and don't worry about this one. And then we've got our main.m. So main.m is where we want to focus, and in here we can add the code that we need to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create ns string, and we'll just call it a message. So I'll just type ns string, and then when we're working with Objective-C, we're working with pointers. So that's why you'll see this asterisk here. This means it's a pointer type. And now I'm going to give it a variable a name. So we'll just call this message. And then we're going to do equals and then a string literal. And so a string literal is just this right here. We have the @ symbol, and then we have the quotes, and then we can put something inside the quotes. So this is text that we can display to the user, or we can process it. We can change attributes to it. So let's say you have 5 unread messages. That's going to be our message. And now we can use nslog to print this out. So it's nslog. Those are capital letters. It's very case sensitive. So if you don't spell it right, you'll have an issue. And then on the inside of the parentheses, we're going to have another string literal with our message. And I'm going to put message, and then we're going to use a string token here. And right down here, now I'm matching against an object. So an object requires a Objective-C pointer type. So that means we need something that looks like this as the variable. And so we'll just put the name of the variable here, and then we can print this out. So if we run this, we'll see that you have 5 unread messages prints out. So that's a little bit about working with just a command line tool. I would use this if you want to play around with for loops, if you want to play around with working with strings. There's a whole slew of things that you can do just to learn things. And the benefit of this is that there's a single file. So you just work in the single file, you learn how to do different things. So if you're following along with one of my exercises, this is a really good starting point because you don't have multiple files to work between. You don't have to juggle a whole lot of things, and you can get output on the console window. Now, the downside of a command line tool is that you don't have any visuals. So don't do this if you want to see things. Do this if you just want to make sure that you understand the syntax of Objective-C, how to create objects, how to create arrays, how to work with saving data and stuff like that. So that's the point of this. Now let's look on the right side. We have right now the quick help up. So depending on where I'm selected, if I'm selected on NSString, you'll see the quick help is going to be active here. Now, if you switch to this tab, again, we have to be careful about the tabs because there are a lot of tabs in Xcode. And then there's tabs within tabs and panels. So right here, we can see a description of stuff. You can get the same information if you hold the Option key and you hover over something and you click on it. So if I'm holding the Option key on my computer or the Alt key, I can move my mouse around, and you'll notice that anytime I'm over a certain thing, things will pop up and we'll see some stuff. Now, sometimes we don't have quick help, and that's fine. So we can just click around and see what it suggests, and then it can give us some references and related methods. So the most interesting thing here is the NSString, so I'm going to show you how this works. I'm just going to hit the Option key and click on it, and that's going to both populate the quick help if I have that open and give me this little pop-up. Now here I can go to the .h file, which is Apple's code file that creates the NSString, and we can see all of the craziness here. So that's a little intense. Or I can do the same thing and I can go to the reference. So if we click on class reference, we will see all of the information on working with NSString. And this is actually a really good thing to read, especially when you're beginning. So I highly recommend reading the NSString class reference. Anytime you see a new class or object in Objective-C, you can either use the documentation, which you can get via the window documentation and API reference, or it's this hotkey, or you can go on Google and just search NSString class reference, and it will be probably the first result. So that is the tip for that. And so that's just working with a command line tool. Now let's go ahead and create one for an iPhone project so you can see the difference. So I'm going to minimize this one, and we'll go to File, New Project for Xcode. So now we're going to get another workspace, and instead of doing the OS X application, I'm going to switch over to iOS application. And here we have a bunch of options. My favorite starting point right now is the single view application. It's just a good place to start because you can start customizing the screen right away and see results. You could do the empty application, but then you have to do a little bit of work to get things working. So I think single view is the best place to start for any beginner. Anytime you're trying to try something out, this is where you want to start. So here we'll just do simple iPhone app. And here, instead of doing universal, I'm going to select iPhone. If you wanted to do universal, you can. That will give you both iPhone and iPad interfaces. It's a little bit more complex. So when you're just learning, I highly recommend sticking to either just iPhone or just iPad. Don't do both because it's going to be a little bit more work, and it's not going to be clear when you just want to test something out real quick. So again, I do this really quickly anytime I want to test out new code or learn how something's working. So here I'll put it in my projects directory on my desktop. And then we've got more project settings that are actually more useful on the iOS app. So right here in the center, we see our project and our targets. Now, if you don't see this, again, it's this little button here, and you have to be selected on this project to see your target. So this is going to create the iPhone app. Here we see the bundle identifier, we see the version. So anytime like Instagram comes out with a new app version, they're going to be incrementing this value and making it 1.1 or something like that. Here we can select the orientations of the app. We can set the app icon. If you click on this little arrow, it will take you to your image assets, which is this file right here. And you can drag and drop from Finder different icons here. So if you've got your images on your desktop or something, you can add them here. You can also add your launch images. Now, the starting point for this application is really that main.m file. And if we expand this left side, you can see the main.m. And here, what it's going to do is it's going to create a UI application and start that. And it looks like a lot of code, and it's going to start up your application. So that is how your app starts. Once that code runs, it actually jumps over to your app delegate code. Now, this is all pre-written by Apple for you, so you don't have to write it. Here are some entry points where you can work with things. Just read the comments here, and I'll show you what happens. The very first thing that's going to happen is right here. So if I put an NSLog statement here, And I'll just copy this method name here and paste it here. When I hit the run button, we're going to see that this happens right away. So this is a point where you can do some setup logic for your application. Usually it's more application specific and not necessarily a certain view. So that's our first starting point. Now, what happens next is, since this is using a storyboard file, the storyboard is going to load. Now, the storyboard file has been set in here. And so here we see the main interface, and you can see that main storyboard is selected. So this is how the storyboard is connected to the app starting. Now I'm going to hide this bottom bar so we have a little bit more view here, and I'll just make this a smaller screen. So this little button here will do this, and you only get this in the storyboard file. You won't get this in the XIB file. Now here is our default interface. We can drag buttons and different components out, and it's all drag and drop. So we can move things around. If you want a label to be bigger, you can select it. Now with this right tab open, beyond the quick help, we can get more information. So the quick help is good if you want to look at some of the ways to work with it, and that's this little icon. Now we have some new icons here, and I can change the font size. So there's a little control here to make the font size bigger, and I'll click a bunch of times. If you click here, you can actually switch it from the system font to a custom font, or there's even these text styles. So maybe I want a headline, or I want a caption. So these are some default styles that are populated here, and we can just use them with the labels. So now if we hit stop and we rerun, we will see the iPhone app, and now it's not as bland as when we had our print statement, and I just lost it here. So here's our iPhone app. We can click on the buttons. Right now they don't do anything, but this is really a starting point. So when we have our interface file, we can actually have multiple interfaces. So I can have another screen here, and the way this is going to work, I'm going to need to hide this panel. So this button will hide another panel that is part of this canvas here. You can move stuff around if you just drag it and move it by the bottom part. We can have different screens pop up. So in order to show that these are two different screens, let's try and drag a control out. And it doesn't like me. Oh, I can't add controls when I'm zoomed out. It would be nice if there was a warning message there, but there's not. Okay, so now when we stop and run, we'll see that the first screen that appears is this one right here. This little arrow will allow me to choose the first screen that starts. So if I switch it over here, we can have this screen appear. And so now we can interact with this screen and press the different buttons. So if we wanted to tie these two together, there is a way. You can just right click on a button and drag, or you can do the control click, and here we can do a modal segue. And what that's going to do is, it's not going to be like the Segway that's got the two wheels, but it's going to make the other view pop up. And now it's a little hard to see what happened there, so I'm going to change the color here, just to show you real quick. So if you're on this tab here, you can click on a different color. Let's go for one of these dark gray colors, just so it's a little bit obvious, and we'll run it again. Now you hit button and that view will appear. Now it's a little bit more work to get it to disappear, so I'm not going to show you how to do that. But I'm just trying to show you how to sort of work with the different screens. Now, a lot of times with the iPhone app, we have two files that are associated with any code file. So before we start with just the main.m, and now we have this view controller class, and the view controller class is going to correspond to this file right here. Now, this gets a little bit hairy, but if you click on your view controller class right here, so it's selected, you will now see that there are some more options here. Now, what we have is a way to connect our code file to our interface file, and that's with this tab right here where it says custom class. We specified view controller. Now, this is going to link this interface to our code file, which is called view controller. So it has to have the same name. So this name needs to match whatever is in the custom class for our view controller. Now, this is automatically set up for you for your first view controller, but if you wanted to add a separate one, you would need to set that yourself. So if I click on this view controller here, we see that the class is not set. And so I could create one and set it up. But it's a little bit more than I want to show you in this video. So I have another video that shows you how to do that you can watch. Now, our view controller class, we can connect code and do different things. So in our main storyboard, one of the things that's important when you're working on an iPhone app, what I find is to use the assistant editor. And that's this icon here. I think it got updated in 5.1. I think it looks a little bit different to me. So it's very similar to what was there before. Interesting. So we got some more options there. So with this, we can see the code file that is associated with this. Now, if I were to, let's see if I can select this one. So this one is selecting the generic file. And here, okay, that was kind of weird. So here, since it's using the base class, you're going to see Apple's code file, which is going to be a little confusing. But when I select this one, we will see the code file that we care about. So let's zoom back in. And zooming around is a little bit challenging with this interface designer. Your toolbars for scrolling sometimes disappear, so I use the trackpad with 2 fingers. Now here we can see the code files. Now I can switch between our .h or our .m file. Now we have 2 code files for Objective-C classes and objects, and so these 2 files go together. You can think of the .h file. Now I'll have them both open here. The .h file is going to describe, it's kind of like an outline, and sometimes we have stuff in there, sometimes we don't. And these are all public sort of accessibility. So when we have multiple code files, when you have more than just these 2 files and you have a bunch of them in a bigger project, you would have some things that you want public and then you want some things that are private. And so that's what this area is for, is we can have some private stuff. And then in the lower section, we have our actual implementation. So you can think of this as the body of a paper, and really it's going to explain how to do something. So that's where all the bulk of the code is going to go. So in main storyboard, I can hook up a button to our viewcontroller.m file. So you can see that in the top here. And here you can drag it into this top part and it will create it, but you could just drag it down here. And I like to put it down here so that we can say button is pressed. So I'm just filling out the little pop-up that appeared. This is going to create an action, and it's going to be touch up inside, which is when the user taps the button and then lets go. We hit connect, and now in here, we can just do an nslog statement. So what I've done is I've connected this to the code, and you can see the connection. There's this little thing that appears, and if we stop and run, when we press button, not only do we see the other screen pop up because of the segue, but we also see button pressed. So I don't really like to do segues too much, so I'm actually going to delete that for now so that it doesn't pop up and we can keep pressing the button. So that is pressing the button, and that is running code that is in this method right here. So that is our storyboard file. The other thing we have here, I showed you the assets before, but I can add new assets here. So if I hit the plus down here, you can create folders, you can import from the project, you can create new image sets, and this helps you organize the images and work with that type of stuff. So again, the app delegate, the did finish launching happens right away when your application starts. There's some additional options in here. If I click on this, you can see them. These happen when the phone app is either minimized or if like a notification comes in and takes over the screen a little bit, or when the application is going to close. So those are some other options where you have basically hooks to do additional logic. So that's our starting point. Because we have the storyboard will appear. And once the storyboard's first view controller, which is wherever this arrow is connected to, that view controller will appear. And so in this case, it's the viewcontroller.m file. And then the first thing that's going to happen here is this method is going to load. So I know this is a lot, but this is just giving you an overview of how Xcode works. So let's just copy and paste this right here. And you can see the application flow right here. So we did finish launching with options, and then view did load appears. So that's the flow of our app. And if you wanted to, I could also put a message here, and we could just put main here. If we rerun this, you're going to see main did finish launching, Vue did load. So that's a gist of working with Xcode, working with the storyboards a little bit, the assistant editor, which shows you two code files at the same time, or it can show you your interface and the code file associated with it. Now, one important thing to see on this is you can do manual or you can do automatic. Generally, you're going to want automatic. So if you have issues with that, you can just fix that. And it looks like we got some warnings. It's saying that one of these things is not reachable, and that's fine because I deleted the connection. So that is our iPhone app. And now you know how to get started so that you can start to mess around with Xcode, use the different screens, and you can even also, one more thing, you can select what device it displays on. So I could switch this to an iPhone Retina, and we could run it, and we'll see a bigger screen. It won't have the outline of the shape because it doesn't fit on my screen, so it'll just be the screen, which is fine. It's still an iPhone app. It's still working. You can still type different things in here. And if you wanted to, you could see how this works on the iPad. It's going to be a little bit smaller, and it's not going to work the same. Right now, it's not an iPad app, so where you're going to see the iPhone app stretching. So if I go to Window, we can do the scale, and I think it will fit with 75%. No. So right now, it's letting me scroll up and down. That's not the best way to interact with your app. So I'm going to do 50% scale. And with this, now we can see the iPad screen, which is this full black area. And then our iPhone app has been scaled up. Now, one of the things I don't see is there's normally a button that says that you can do the 2x scale, and that's not appearing here. So it's just scaled up. If you were to run this on a device, you would normally see a button down there. So that's running an iPhone app on an iPad. And to get this to really work, you need to create a universal app, or you need to make some changes to your storyboard file and how your code files are loading. But that's more work than I want to show you right now. So here is a great starting point for working with Xcode.